Anyway, I emailed them and said, would you mind shooting me? And the owner, Miguel, got back to me and said, no worries. So I flew to Bogota, Colombia, and he put a jacket on me, took me into his factory, a bulletproof jacket, and then at point blank shot me.
Welcome to Behind the Armor, where we deep dive into the heart of what matters. I'm your host, Judd Shaw, adventurer, storyteller, agent of change, and speaker on authenticity and human connection. Join me as we explore the complexities of human connection, featuring theorists, scientists, and speakers. Our mission is simple: to inspire you to reclaim your true self and create genuine connections with others. Join me as we lay down our armor and live authentically. Seb, welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I wanted to ask you directly, what of your 100 things, and we're going to get into what that list is all about, what is one thing that's still like the next one that you want to do?
It's a really good question. I've been doing this for 16 years.
Yeah.
So I think over time, the goals sort of change a little bit.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing recently is going through and just assessing which ones still really resonate with me and which don't. So I'm going through that process. But as I do it, the one that there's two. One is I'm trying to learn French, and it's been ongoing for years. And so that just fascinates me. When I start thinking in French and reading texts, that really excites me. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, and hopefully you weren't hanging on this answer as the thing for the podcast, but learning French. I'm trying to learn a classical piano piece. Yeah. I've been learning for about 3.5 years. I don't know any of the notes on a piano, but I'm learning from a YouTube video, and I'm just memorizing finger positions. And the song is Clair de Lune, which I don't know if you know. It's like a beautiful, it's just a beautiful piece. And I'm like 2.5 minutes in after 3.5 years of memorizing. So there's stuff like that. At the same time, one I'm contemplating at the moment is doing an Olympic ski jump. I've always wanted to do when you go down, like Eddie the Eagle.
Lake Placid. You have to ramp.
And so when I came up with the list 16 years ago, that was important to me. Because at that time, I was like seeking adrenaline-fueled activities. And now I'm quite a different person. And so that's one, for example, that I'm just readdressing. But I'm writing a script at the moment. That's, that's one that I'm really excited by. I'm trying to connect more with my family. I live overseas. I live here in the US, and my family's in Australia. So, trying to create a tradition with my sister and seeing her annually. And yeah.
Have you seen that ski jump in person?
Yeah. I did a talk in Norway, and I went to, I think it's Lillehammer, and I stood at the top. And actually, I was like, I could do this. It probably means I should. But I should also qualify. It's not really about the landing. It's the ski jump. So as soon as I leave, it's done. It's a check. How I land is unimportant. So I don't think about that.
At least not to your list.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about what that's all about, right? Let's take this step back to talk about where the 100 things came from, to give context to the audience. And you're growing up in Australia, and Chris is in your life.
Yeah.
Tell me about Chris for a moment. Let me understand, what's his personality? What's he like? If I were to meet him today, what would he be like?
Well, I was born in Australia. I moved to England for 10 years, came back to Australia at 14 years old. I knew no one. So I went straight in as a 14-year-old to grade 9 at high school. And sort of in that time, I played rugby. I started rowing surf boats, which is a thing in Australia. And then, meeting people and just socializing. And Chris was one of, the most loved guys. Everyone, he was like everyone's best mate, basically. Loved his friends, loved his family, loved doing things with his mates, loved the ocean, liked being a big kid. Just had a very natural draw and appeal to him. And so I really looked up to Chris, in that way. So we went to high school together. And then after high school, I went to university. Chris stayed local on the northern beaches, Avalon Beach. Have you ever been?
No.
Oh, so good. He stayed there. And then we sort of fell out of, contact as people do. And it was, years later when I found out that he had died. So, in the years leading up to that, we hadn't really, stayed in touch too much. But, my memory of Chris is from high school, playing sport, being silly, having too many beers, experiencing life as kids,
His passing, though, was that catalyst for you writing down 100 things that you wanted to do to bring about a feeling.
Yeah.
And I understood it that Chris's tragic death had shaken that had he known that he would pass after 24 years, would he do it differently? And you think today, no. How is he living his life that would be the answer?
He was just really present. He just enjoyed, he knew what he enjoyed and did those things. He didn't try and overcomplicate it. Which I think is something that we can all learn from. I think so many of us, and certainly myself back then, you kind of future project where you need to be, what you need to be doing, what you need to have, and it takes you away from the moment. And Chris was in the moment. He was just such a great energy to be around because you felt like that was you were part of his world, And when he passed, I contemplated. I think death does that. It makes you reflect on, the deceased and then yourself. And I saw and realized, he was really present. A life far too short, but really well lived from my perspective. And I thought about myself, and I just didn't even know who I was.
When you were writing the list, I like how you said that you don't love the term bucket list. In fact, I read a book by Arthur Brooks called Strength to Strength. And he said that we should all create the unbucket list. As he described happiness as, your haves divided by your wants equals satisfaction. Your haves divided by your wants. The more you want, the less satisfied you feel.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you take your haves and you have a whole bunch of bucket list ideas that you want, you move away from the presence of the have, and you're in the world of the want, and you're actually less satisfied. And so when you're writing this list, Seb, of 100 things, was it things that you wanted to do that inspired you, or was there a feeling, was there emotion? What was it that you were actually chasing that rattled you?
Happiness. I just wanted to feel happy. I remember the night I heard Chris had passed. I was in Canada. I sat on the floor with a piece of paper and a pen, and I just started writing. I didn't know what I was writing. And after however long it was, I concluded that for me, the best I feel is when I'm happy. And I arguably that's everyone. It's the same, right? We all have a desire to feel good. How we get there is different. And so I started to consider for the first time, well, how do I get there? So being a simple person, I thought, well, how do I know when I'm happy? And it's when I'm smiling or laughing or doing something that matters to me. And so in that moment, I gave myself permission to just consider the things that I hoped would bring a smile to my face. And that was it. I just wanted to pursue happiness. And so that was the beginning of the list. So there were so many different and odd things, silly, meaningful, short-term, long-term, selfish, selfless things. And that's where it came from. I think we're all bound by the idea that we want to feel good. And if we're able to identify how we can do that, which is different for everyone, that's a really important first step. And then, of course, I found out down the track that in addition to doing things for myself, it's vital, in my opinion, to do things with and for other people as well. So happiness isn't necessarily defined by your wants in the end. I think it really boils down to, yes, feeling you're doing stuff on purpose, but doing it in a community of like-minded people where you're actually contributing to something bigger than yourself. And so 16 years down the track, I'm still learning all of this, but I feel really happy and fulfilled and content. And I wouldn't change anything, driving here today. There's nothing else I'd rather be doing than just sat with you talking about this. you're on your journey too.
All
so
right.
we get to come together in this moment and just appreciate the fact that we're both trying our best. And that's inspiring to me.
Right? You know, from delivering a baby, marrying a stranger in Vegas, living on a deserted island. I mean, some wild stuff. But it wasn't until number 26 that really changed. Tell me about that differs from all of the other silly or fun or adrenaline filled, list items that you checked off.
Well, number 26 is help a stranger. That's how it reads. And I just hadn't really helped anyone before. People would say, we all have friends who do a marathon or a 10K run and they ask for a donation to a charity. I would just go delete. I just never helped anyone. I was pretty selfish. And so on my list of things that I wanted to try for the first time, I was like, I'll help somebody. It so happened that it was a gentleman called Mark who had seen me do an interview on TV, and he was able-bodied until his early 20s, where he was then bitten by a tick, contracted Lyme's disease, became a quadriplegic without the ability to move or speak. Pretty tragic. And he asked me to shave his head. He said that he'd created a bucket list because he had heard of my story, and he wanted me to shave his head. So I shaved his head, and I got an immense sense of satisfaction just from that, in a small way, being of service to someone. And then I said, what else can I do? And as you know, he said, his carer told me that he had always wanted to do a half marathon. And so I asked how I could help him, and he said, push me. That's the first words I understood from Mark. And so I pushed him in his wheelchair for a half marathon. And it was just the greatest thing I've ever done. And I talk about it from stage all the time because it's true. It was not an act of charity. It wasn't helping somebody. It was two people who had very different lives, but they both identified a goal each. And because they shared it, we found that there was an opportunity to collaborate. So it was like this. You want to, interview a podcast guest, and I think, that'd be interesting. We're collaborating. So Mark and I got to collaborate that day and connect on a level which was profound for me, being of service to someone, and then seeing also that I wasn't the only one pushing Mark. By the end of the race, there were 20 people, strangers, pushing Mark across the finish line. It just really highlighted to me that we're all in this together. We are strong as individuals, but we are better together. We have an innate ability and desire to support, to collaborate, to help others. And I'm realizing that we live in a society where we're not quite sure how to all the time, because in the first place, we're not vulnerable enough to say, hey, I need help with this, or this is really important to me. Who can help me? And so that's the conversation that I really enjoy engaging with now, encouraging people to think about what's important to them and then trying to find others to connect with them. So there's this sense of collective evolution. I really believe that we each have like an individual spark, and the key to something better is being able to change that into a collective sense of contribution.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I'd heard that really deeply under happiness lies joy, and under joy lies satisfaction.
Right.
That if we're really truly satisfied, we're mindful, we're content, gratitude, all these things, but it's where do you turn? There's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of, we want to find that passion, that purpose, the happiness, the joy. And a lot of times we can go about it and almost push away the very thing we're craving. You recently attended the Hoffman Institute.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, the Hoffman process.
The Hoffman process. Tell me about that experience.
It was life-changing for me. I'm 43. I did it at 42 years old. It's a process that was recommended to me by Ben Nempton, good friend of ours, another speaker. I knew a few other people who had done it as well. I saw Ben come out of it, and it was like he was a different person. And we're good friends. And so he said, I think you should do this. And I was curious as to doing something on this personal development, journey we're all on. And so it's essentially a 7-day retreat, no phone. It's a process which is about 50 years in the making. It's been iterated, of course, along the way. And it allows you the opportunity to identify the negative patterns that we've onboarded from the way that our parents brought us up. And once you identify what those patterns are, The process allows you to disconnect from those negative patterns, so you have full agency over how you want to be now, without the negative kind of bias, if you will. And that's incredibly freeing. And, you know, a lot of us have shame, negative self-talk. The process allowed me to realize that I had this core belief that I was worthless, and also, not to sound and jump to something that's too profound, but I also didn't love myself. And the process allows you to address that. And so in 7 days, I came out and I was bouncing. I was just bouncing. And it's impacted in an incredibly positive way in my life since, every aspect of my life. It's allowed me to find love, which was something I was looking for. It's allowed me to just feel like I'm being myself. Because I think you're right. I think you can, with the what's, as you mentioned before, the wants, if we want too much, there's a tendency to get away from what's really important, and we over systemize things because we're told everything's formulaic, and if we follow the formula, we'll reach a sense of satisfaction or joy or happiness. And I think what Hoffman allowed me to do was get back into the emotion of it. Mm-hmm. There's just so many things in my life recently which have pointed me in this direction, and I know that I operate best when I'm led by emotion.
Yeah.
And curiosity, rather than strategy and, visioning all these things that I hope will bring me happiness.
Right.
I try and be more in the moment, like Chris was.
For so long, I was seeking external validation, and I thought it was the things that would bring about the happiness. And then when I wasn't happy, I worked harder, because then I thought that I didn't have nice enough things, right, or the things weren't impressive enough to others to help me feel more validated. When I realized that what was behind that was shame, unworthiness. I used to think I was unlovable, and I would tell myself that. And so when we tell ourselves that we're unlovable and we're broken, that's a narrative, that's a belief. And when you say it enough, you're going to believe it. And so are these the narratives and the beliefs that we're talking about, that really, instead of looking at what we need to get as opposed to what we need to shed or change? Was that your experience?
Yeah, it's really well put, for sure. The way that I did it a while ago now, so I might not do this justice, but, from a young age, as kids, babies, our parents might not be around because they're working or something, but you feel lonely and you don't have the capacity to understand that your dad's working late or whatever it might be. And so you think, oh, it must be my fault. So you build shame from the core. And then as we get older, we tend to try and offset that with habits that allow us to feel better. They can be negative patterns, could be drinking, it could be self-sabotage, judgment, whatever. We all have, many patterns. And to your point, the Hoffman process for me was a process of shedding rather than gaining. In fact, I went, you get a coach when you go in there, and I said to my coach, I need systems for my life to operate better. And he was like, no, you don't. And he was Corey, he's become a very good friend of mine. He was right. He was right, because we live in a world where this is instant gratification, and again, there's lots of systems, 3 ways to do this, 5 ways to elevate this, the morning routines, right, you must do, it's an ice bath, stare at the sun for 10 minutes, whatever they are. And, there's some benefit to all of that, of course, but to think that is the way to get ahead and find yourself and find purpose I think that's a bit short-sighted. That's what I'm learning. So it was definitely a matter of shedding stuff, accepting myself, self-compassion, forgiveness are 2 really important tenets, I think, for us as humans to have. And so on the last day of the Hoffman process, I remember looking in the mirror, and there had been no physiological change, but I looked in the mirror and I just looked different. And I said, I love you. And I burst out crying because it was the first time I really felt it. I feel the emotions talking about it now. And and it equips you, it gives you tools to, when you sort of stray perhaps back into these negative patterns that we do, it allows you to kind of identify that, and then you have the opportunity to work through those.
I have a post-it on my mirror that it's old now. It's like bending and folding. So I had to tape it. And it just simply says, Judd, I love you. Judd.
It's great. I have something on my mirror that says, my presence unleashes my magic. My magic is enough. Loving myself will yield what I need. And it's the same thing, isn't it? It's just self-love.
Right.
Yeah.
Brene Brown talks so much about that very well, that it's the worthiness, that we are enough because we are.
Yeah.
And I actually learned later on that shame was my core wound. And so I was coming and acting from a place of shame. And so that was rooted perhaps maybe where I could have parents who were strict or punished mistakes. And so I learned that mistakes didn't mean failing forward and success and opportunities for growth and being curious and creativity. I heard and learned perfectionism.
Right.
And so hearing you reminds me that for so long, a blind spot of mine was that the perfectionism was the unhealthy part. It was the part that was showing up when I felt shame.
Yeah.
See, Judd, you didn't do that well enough.
Yeah.
See? And that's those narratives that can really be set early on in life. What blind spots did you learn? I'm curious.
Well, I think that's a really interesting concept, the idea that we can't know it all, it's impossible, but what it is important to know is what we can at least look at as, and improve, like, i.e. what our blind spots are. Well, I've just discovered one recently. I'm for the first time in a long time in a relationship, and it's my first relationship, my adult years, which is really serious. I believe I found like the one, and this is very topical, actually. I've just had a discussion with my partner about it, but I thought, I'm 43. I've got plenty of life experience. I've done the Hoffman process. I've done, whatever. I'm pretty good. You just slip me into a relationship and I'll be fine. And I've realized my latest blind spot is, oh, no. I've got to learn what partnership really is. It's fine being a nice guy and having self-compassion and the concept of wanting to have family and all that stuff. But there's a bit of a framework to it too, to consider another person, to be more collaborative rather than two independent people, not to be codependent. Like there's a lot to it. So my latest blind spot is that. And I'm addressing it. I'm listening to an audio book by someone, I can't remember his name, but he's a well-known couples therapist, and we're going through this together. But it's true for everyone. I mean, you and I, we're on stages all the time speaking, and there's probably a perception that because we're doing that, we know it all. And it's not. I have as many blind spots as anyone else, and I'm trying my best to look at mine and then allow other people to perhaps look at theirs too.
And to that point, that actually set me back very early on, because when I first went on my healing journey, shedding those things that were no longer serving me, it felt impossible. It felt like, wow, I need to wake up like 3 hours earlier than I'm already waking up just to get the cold bath in, the meditation time, the avocado perfectly on the right? And then I needed still time now to ground after all that, because I can't start my neck. There were all of these things, spiritually, healing, self-development, self-improvement. And so I felt that I couldn't do all of this. And so for a time, really early on, I was like, I'd rather go back and fall back into the rut because I can't do these things. But I was looking at them again from that same belief that I had to do them perfectly.
Yeah.
Like, just start with one, Judd. It doesn't have to be the whole thing.
Yeah.
Splash some cold water on your face before you have to buy the cold plunge dunk tank and everything, right?
Yeah.
And that also showed up in speaking, where some amazing speakers, you and Ben, so many others, and I'm in that wake, and I'm going, I can't do that. right? And those are really the beliefs that are acting out.
For sure.
Those are the ones showing up, right?
Yep.
And giving myself permission to allow myself to not be perfect, to do it almost imperfectly, was one of the most self-loving, compassionate, graceful things I could do for myself at that time.
Yeah.
And I know that there are so many that come from, like, you often hear people come from plant medicine retreats.
Yeah.
Particularly their first one. And they're off onto this spiritual high. And they come back and they're telling everybody, you know, I need to tell my sister or my wife and everybody I know has to go to this plant medicine because they feel this. And then sure enough, life comes back into play.
Mm-hmm.
After you experience the Hoffman process, 7 days, you come back. How do you integrate and be able to do that on a daily practice so that you don't fall back into putting masks back on your face?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they obviously have a whole process, you know, which you can use with you. So they talk about a quadrinity. So it's the idea that we have an emotional self, an intellectual self, a physical self, and a spiritual self. And each one needs to be addressed separately, but they need to learn how to work together.
Yeah.
So you can actually start a relationship and have conversation with each one and ensure that they're safe and they can work together. And that's, you know, to the betterment of all of us. You're being led by your spiritual self ultimately. So checking in, doing, you know, what they would call quadrinity checks, like a meditation essentially, is one thing. But there's also models around how to, you know, if we have negative patterns or, you know, whatever it might be, you might isolate yourself at a party or you might judge someone and you feel those things coming in, you can, what do they call it? You pre-cycle those things. So before you go out, for example, you'd sit down and think about the moment arising, what you would do, your spiritual self would want you to do. And it just helps. So there's lots of little, you know, tips and tactics and techniques and stuff. And I'm sure there are many modalities that allow, that lead people to the same place. But yes, I mean, I'm a year and a half out from doing that now. And although I haven't been doing my quad checks recently, I still do use a lot of the stuff in Hoffman, almost in subconscious ways now. And not meaning that I'm perfect, but I'm doing a lot better.
Do you feel there's any difference between a pattern and a belief?
I think a belief probably influences the pattern.
Great point.
Yeah, I think so. Because a pattern is like I judge you, and maybe there's a belief that I feel I need to because I'm actually quite insecure.
Right.
So that's my take on it. I could be completely wrong, but as you say it to me, I feel
that sounns right to me.
Thank goodness.
You know, that yes, the patterns are created as a result of the belief. It's like a pattern often to me sounds like the coping mechanism to the belief.
For sure. I mean, actually, if you think of like a triangle and, you know, at the top of the triangle, the top point is belief, then there's action, and then there's result. If someone's pessimistic and the world's not kind to their belief is the world's not kind to them, everyone's horrible and nothing ever works out for them, etc. That belief absolutely informs their action in the day. They're shut off, they're closed, they might not be conversational, they might not ask the question, you know, whatever. And that leads to the result of, at the end of the day, the world hasn't really showed up for them because they haven't showed up to the world, and that only kind of reinforces their initial belief. And so when it comes to, well, how do we actually change if we have these negative beliefs? There are so many ways to do it, but the one that I really like to look at is just action. You can't change your belief ultimately. If you think, well, the world's horrible, you can't just go, oh, no, it's not. That's tough. And the result is a byproduct of the action. So I like to, you know, talk to people about what can we just do differently, even though we might not feel like it, that will change the result, which will in turn slightly tweak the initial belief and then, you know, start that kind of a positive snowball effect. And I think that's really important when it comes to striving for goals. A lot of times people, having seen my list, will say, well, how were you able to do that? And I will say, I tried. that's it. Even though I was nervous or apprehensive, or I was, I had self-doubt. I just tried something different. And beliefs are beliefs. Patterns are, I think, perhaps more action-based things. But I'm still working on both of them is the answer.
Me too.
Yeah.
When I left recovery, a rehab years ago, and as I was leaving, my therapist, and I was moving to Newport Beach, California, and my therapist had said to me, Judd, if you want to find deep satisfaction, the joy that you're looking for, go help someone else. It'll last much longer than the smell of the leather, on an exotic car. And I remember when I went out to Newport very early on, I found these homeless camps would hang out at the Balboa Pier or the Newport Pier, and often people were giving them food. And I asked, there was actually a police officer who gets assigned to the homeless unit in Newport. And she happened to be there when I was talking to her, and she said, Judd, what they really need are feminine products, socks, underwear, things of that nature. And it just sparked. So I went out and I went to Target or Walmart, and I bought a bunch of the big white socks, and I started going around, and this happened for a while, but I would go, and then there was this time, now I'm going months forward, where I went to a tent, and I said, and I would refer to myself as JB. That's what I called myself when I would meet them. And I tapped on the guy's tent, and he opened his tent, and I said, I'm just here seeing if you need any socks. I happen to have some chips, and he said, no, that's cool. I'll take a pair of tube socks, man. Thanks so much. I'm Edward. And I remembered it because it was my grandfather's name. He said, what's your name? I said, JB. He said, I heard about you. That feeling at that moment, I'm wondering for you, with your experience, whether it's 26 compared to all the things that you've done.
Yeah.
For me, it changed the belief that I'm unworthy. It changed my narrative that I have no value. It changed that deep-seated pattern that I'm broken. That moment changed that for me. And I realized that. What was your experience with all of this?
Well, I think helping other people or supporting other people or collaborating with other people, however you want to phrase it, for me allowed me to realize I'm part of something bigger than just myself. And so I think as you grow up, we probably all just think about ourselves. That's kind of, you sort of have to. When you're a kid, you think about your joy, you. And as you get older, the opportunity then arises to do something for other people. And every time I do it, and I'm fortunate to do it a lot, it makes me realize I'm part of something bigger, and it allows me to feel connected. It allows me to feel useful and worthy, or not worthy, but valuable to other people as well.
It was like a mirror. I wanted to go back to the therapist and say, how did you know that? How did you know that if I was going to really make it that social impact, that would be better than all of the material things I've ever owned? And I think listening to you, particularly about your experience, it's because I broke that belief.
Yeah.
It's because in that moment, my narrative was crashed, crushed, shattered. It was as if I was always told that a country looks like this, and now I visited it. And I was like, wait, this isn't what anybody's told me about. And you just talking about beliefs and narratives brought me back to that moment. That I think it was because that narrative that I held on to so long was shattered. How can you be unlovable? How can you be broken? How can you be just really have no value? Yet this guy's like, I heard about you for all the good things you're doing.
I mean, it's beautiful. It's great. I think that's why it's so important when you're building a bucket list that there are things on there for yourself and there are things on there for other people. In my experience, I think a lot of us are one or the other. We're either selfish or selfless, and either one of those by themselves are unhealthy. It's nice to say, well, all I do is go out there and help people. I help people all the time, but you need to work on yourself too. You need to help yourself. So I would definitely.
But that's a big part of that, your story, which resonated with me, was that when I fast forward to helping the community and helping Edward with just a simple pair of socks, that came long after I had already worked on helping myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a very important point, that you, even as a leader in the boardroom, a manager or supervisor, when you're responsible, when you're accountable for helping other people, for supervising, training, leading other people, how can you do that if you can't do that for yourself?
For sure. I mean, every time you get into a plane, they will tell you, in case of an emergency, oxygen masks will drop from the ceiling. Please put yours on first before helping others. I mean, it's just the perfect kind of analogy or metaphor, whichever one. I always get confused. But you have to look after yourself. Otherwise, you are useless to other people. And then as a side comment to that, a leader in a boardroom, a manager in the workplace, you then have to think about, well, what's actually helpful? I think we have a tendency to just try and, especially as men, we just want to solve and, give the person a fish as opposed to teach them. I think one thing that's really interesting for me, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is what is effective leadership, whether it's at home with your family, in the community, or in the workplace. And for me at least, I think it's not forcing a result or forcing a way of being on people. I think instead you're trying to, the biggest way you can help is to create an environment that encourages people to perform. And I think you do that by allowing people to feel seen and heard, valued, acknowledged, understood, giving them a voice. And I think that's what you did with Edward. You had a conversation. What is it you need? I hear you. You allowed him to feel part of something, and then you provided what you could. And so I think, we often are on stage talking to corporate audiences. I think effective leadership truly comes down to allowing people to feel seen, heard, acknowledged, valued. And when you do that, you build trust, you build avenues for communication, and ultimately it leads to progress and transformation, and you improve culture of any organization or team.
Yeah. I think a lot of the organizations and companies are shooting for this real sense of belonging. For me, in my experience, at least with my own law firm, it was mirroring that did that. I had to show up that way to give permission to others to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, if you show, it's sort of like the Braveheart effect.
Right.
Like Braveheart inspired people.
Right.
He galvanized a nation of countrymen to stand up against an invasion. And inspiration is one thing, but it's not enough. So he then equipped them with tools or a framework that allowed them to not only feel inspired, but be able to latch that onto something. And then they all became a team. They were all elevated together. And I think maybe the third part of that is, if we inspire people, we give them a framework to then become elevated themselves. I think then the true key to creating a thriving culture or community or team is peer-to-peer connection. When you're actually able to connect with someone, understand what they want, and have the tools to be able to help them, whether you're in an army or a workplace, I think that's when you start moving together in a much more effective way. So yes, you need to inspire by the way that you act. You need to create a framework for others to come up with you, so you're all elevated, and then you just need to connect everyone together. And I think it's a really important point to note. Again, whether it's in reference to a family, your community, or an organization.
You remind me that it's really helpful to be intentional. I don't know if I've thought about it, quite frankly, enough, which is, what beliefs and narratives may I be holding that are showing up in my workplace today? So for instance, before, because my core wound was shame, I shamed other people's mistakes. Not only because I wanted things done perfectly, but what would that say about me?
Right.
Right? If somebody else is making a mistake, what does that say about me as the person training, leading? And so that belief was showing up in my workplace. It's not just in my personal life. It's not in my relationships or when I went home. It was in my workplace. And I wonder now, I think about that. It's a great question is, can we ask ourselves as leaders, what beliefs and narratives are we holding on to that may be showing up in our workplace?
Yeah.
And holding back the very thing that we all want, which, the sense of belonging and growth, creativity, innovation.
Well, I think to your point, we all, whether we know it or not, create a ripple effect of influence on the people around us. And whether that ripple is positive or negative does come down to the way we show up. And so if you're showing up with shame and jealousy, judgment, control, whatever these things are, people feel that.
Well put.
People just feel that. And so as a leader, I think it's really important that we make the choice every day to consciously lead in a way in which you'd want others to feel seen and heard and feel motivated and engaged and connected and build this environment of trust. It's the only way. So I think as soon as selfish endeavor comes in or a leader hasn't done the self-work to show up as someone who's balanced and fair and all those other things, I think that does start to create a negative ripple effect. So, but the beautiful thing about it is it's a choice. It's a choice. We all have agency in our lives. I actually think living a good life comes down to being able to express ourselves through the things that we do as an extension of our personalities. I think having agency, so knowing that we can take action on the things that are important to us, I think that gives us a sense of meaning or purpose, which is crucial to, just standing up a little taller and having a more positive effect. And finally, if we get those three things, we feel expressed, we have agency, and we do start to connect. It leads to connection.
Yeah, and
it leads to connection.
It's expressing authentically.
Yeah.
Because one of those things is I was wearing masks so long, there was masks that I was wearing perhaps that I didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Right. And again, shedding those things, showing up as me was its own work. Yeah. Like I had to find out what does authentic Judd look like?
Yeah. And
then when I'm able to do that, then I'm able to anchor. So what I anchor in my company today is that mirror. Am I showing up as the best version that I can today and giving my team permission to do the same?
Yeah. And so if it comes down to authenticity, the question then becomes, well, how do you do all that work? And there are many ways of doing it: therapy, Hoffman process, etc. I love to talk about lists and goals. And I think from every experience that I've done, and that I may be known for, from marrying a stranger to delivering a baby to helping a stranger to walking across a country, whatever those things are, those things aren't actually the important parts. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Each experience, though, has allowed me to work out something more about myself each time, whether it's tiny or a huge insight. And over time, I've seen that these lists that we have, these bucket lists that we have, are more so just vehicles for us to get into, to work out ourselves. So I would say the key to being authentic, realizing who we are so that we have impact on other people in the most positively profound way, is by being ourselves. That's the key. I really believe it. And if you can be yourself on a podcast, by yourself as you're going to the bathroom, on a stage, speaking to a crowd of people, meeting a that's the indicator. If you're consistent in all those situations, you're on the right track.
When you hitchhike across America, what was one moment on that particular journey that stood out?
Well, every car had a gun in it. And on one occasion, there was this dude who I was fascinated, because we don't have guns in Australia, basically. And he said, look in my glove box, I have a gun in there. And I was like, wow. So I picked up this gun. It wasn't loaded. And I looked down the barrel of it. So I pointed it at myself and it freaked me out. And I thought, how do I get around this? So I thought, right, I'm going to I'm going to organize in a safe way a situation where I get shot. So I then Googled bulletproof clothing companies, and a place showed up in Colombia, and I emailed them. It's called Miguel Caballero, and they make they make bulletproof clothing for armies, for the presidents, anyway, I emailed them and said, would you mind shooting me? And the owner, Miguel, got back to me and said, no worries. So I flew to Bogota, Colombia, and he put a jacket on me, took me into his factory, a bulletproof jacket, and then at point blank shot me. So that, as you say, what was the most memorable part of hitchhiking across the US? It was probably that. That was a bit weird. What I also found, though, what was actually another interesting thing of that, it took me 13 rides to get across from Palm Beach, Florida, to West Palm Beach, Florida, to San Diego, 6 days. And in every single car, you sort of sit there with a complete stranger, and because you don't know each other and you're never going to see each other again, it just becomes a mini confessional. And so the stories I heard from these people were wild. And I just found it's an interesting theme around connection and sharing. The things I heard were things that they would not share with their friends or family, I'm sure. So yeah, which means for me, what do I learn from that? Well, there is a way to instantly connect in a deep and profound way with people. And one of the elements, which is maybe not a healthy thing, is knowing you're never going to see them again. But anyway, it doesn't take a long... I think my learning from that was you can really connect in a deep way quickly with someone with the right environment.
That would make for an interesting podcast, The Hitchhiker.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was a great experience.
So you have about a quarter left on this list.
Yeah.
What's the one that's calling you?
In complete truth, I haven't looked at my list in a little while.
Wow.
I'm working on French. I'm learning the piano. Last year, I checked off surfing the Pororoca, which is the Amazon River in South America, in Brazil. A couple of times a year, a supermoon rises and it draws in a big tidal wave or a bore. It's called a bore, a tidal bore, and you can surf that. And so it's a pretty precarious thing. There's piranhas, there's alligators, there's a big wave rolling through this river, and I went and surfed it, and it was the first thing I've done from my list of a significant thing in a while, and I cried at the end of it. It was that moving to me, both the natural elements that we were in, but also this feeling of purpose I had. And it reminded me that it is really, I love being on stage because I think I impact people in a positive way. And the business of speaking is something that I love. I love these things, connecting with the other speakers, doing their amazing things too. But it was a reminder that I need to still do the things on my list. And so I've got a few things that I'm working on, which I won't share, but you'll hear about it soon. But yeah, the reminder for me and maybe a message for everyone else is it's really important to consistently commit to the things that you identify as important to you, no matter what they are, no matter how big or small. And at times I've forgotten that myself. So a few things I've got on the back burner, and you've motivated me in this interview to really go attack it again. Well,
I know that having a podcast episode with me was, and without shame,
yeah.
I shed shame and could say that I know that was not on your top 100. But for me, I'm so happy you're here. Seb, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Judd, what an absolute pleasure. Thanks, mate. What a conversation. I really enjoyed that.
Me too. I'm a hugger.
Oh, good.
I want to extend my deepest gratitude to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow us on your favorite platform or share this episode with a friend. You can also follow me on Instagram at Judd Shaw Official. A special thank you to personal injury law firm Judd Shaw Injury Law for their support in helping us bring this podcast to life. Remember, friends, authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about embracing our vulnerabilities, celebrating our strengths, and owning our stories. Until next time.